My husband laughed and said, "You'd be nothing without me." When I suggested couples therapy, I replied, "Let's test that theory." Then I started the business he'd mocked for years. When Forbes featured me 18 months later, his interview request went straight to my spam. My husband laughed and said, "You'd be nothing without me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult me outright. He laughed, soft, amused, confident, like the outcome was already decided and I just hadn't accepted it yet. We were standing in our kitchen, the overhead light buzzing faintly, a half-empty mug of coffee going cold between us. I remember the way his eyes flicked back to his phone before I could even respond, as if the conversation had already lost its value. I had suggested couples therapy, not as a threat, not as a last stand, as a genuine attempt to save something I had spent 12 years building with him. He laughed again. "Therapy for what? So you can complain to some stranger that I don't validate your little dreams enough? Our marriage is fine. You're just unhappy because you're stuck in a job you hate and you're too scared to do anything about it." My chest tightened, but I stayed still. I'd learned over the years that reacting too quickly only gave him more ammunition. I told him quietly that maybe I should finally start the consulting business I'd been talking about for years, the one I'd researched late at night, the one clients had encouraged me to pursue, the one he had always dismissed with the same indulgent smile. This time he laughed harder. "With what money? What clients? You'd crash and burn in 6 months, and then I'd be supporting both of us while you found yourself. No, thank you." Something shifted in me then. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. I looked at him and asked, "You really think I'd be nothing without you?" He didn't hesitate. "I think you'd struggle significantly. Someone in this relationship has to be realistic." So I smiled and said the words that would quietly end our marriage. "Let's test that theory." He rolled his eyes. Another dramatic declaration, he thought. Another empty threat. He had no idea that while he went back to scrolling through his phone, I was already done begging to be seen. 18 months later, when a journalist from Forbes reached out to feature my company, his interview request, sent under a fake name, went straight to my spam folder. And that's where it stayed. Before he ever laughed at me, before I learned how small someone could make you feel without ever raising their voice, there was a version of us that looked solid from the outside, stable, even enviable. We met 12 years ago at a friend's engagement party, one of those loud, over-decorated events where everyone pretends not to be assessing each other's careers within the first 5 minutes. I remember standing near the bar nursing a drink I didn't really want when he walked up and made a joke about how we were both hiding from the dance floor. His confidence was effortless, not loud, not performative, just assured, like he belonged anywhere he stood. He asked what I did for work. When I told him I was an IT project manager, his eyes lit up with interest. He said he admired people who could actually build things, people who made systems work behind the scenes. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. It felt like recognition. In the beginning, he made me feel chosen. He had already been accepted into an MBA program then, a good one. His parents were helping him with tuition, something he mentioned casually, like it was no big deal. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. Plenty of people had supportive families. It didn't feel like a warning sign, just context. We moved quickly, but not recklessly. At least that's what I told myself. Dates turned into weekends together. Weekends turned into drawers in each other's apartments. When he talked about the future, he spoke in concrete terms. Promotions, home ownership, security. It felt grounding. I had always been the practical one, the planner. Being with someone who spoke that language fluently felt like alignment. When he proposed, it was thoughtful. No grand spectacle, just a quiet moment, a ring, and a promise of stability. I said yes without hesitation. Marriage, at first, felt like a partnership. We hosted dinner parties. We planned vacations months in advance. When he landed his corporate marketing role at a Fortune 500 company, I celebrated him genuinely. I was proud. When my projects at work went well, he congratulated me too, at least at the start. But somewhere along the way, the tone shifted. It wasn't immediate. It never is. It began with comparisons disguised as jokes. "You work hard, but you don't have the same growth trajectory I do." I just think ambition looks different for different people. When his parents helped us with the down payment on our house, it was framed as generosity. And it was. But it also became a quiet line in the sand, a reminder of who came from what. He earned more than I did, around $140,000 a year compared to my $85,000. The gap wasn't massive, but he treated it like a defining trait. Conversations about money subtly shifted from we to him. Vacations became things he was treating me to. Furniture purchases somehow reflected his success more than our shared life. I noticed it, but I explained it away. Stress, work pressure, ego. Everyone has flaws. I told myself love meant patience. What I didn't realize then was how slowly my confidence was shrinking to fit the space he allowed me to occupy. How often I softened my opinions to avoid eye rolls. How I stopped talking about my long-term ideas because I didn't want to see that look, half pity, half amusement, cross his face. By the time I started seriously thinking about independence, about building something of my own, I had already been training myself not to expect support from the person who was supposed to be my partner. And that version of me, the one who still believed effort would eventually earn respect, didn't yet understand how far gone we already were. The first time I seriously talked about starting my own consulting business, he didn't interrupt me. That should have been the warning. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the TV on, but muted, one of those evenings where you're together in the same room, but living completely separate lives. I had rehearsed the conversation in my head all day. I wasn't asking for permission. I just wanted acknowledgement. I told him about my experience. 15 years in enterprise systems integration, projects I'd led, clients who had told me, unprompted, that I should consider going independent. I spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded reasonable, responsible, not risky, not emotional. He listened, nodded, let me finish. Then he gave me that look, the one I would come to know so well. A mixture of pity and amusement, like a parent indulging a child who just announced they wanted to be an astronaut. Babe, he said gently, you're not an entrepreneur. You're a worker bee, and that's not a bad thing. Someone has to do the actual work. That phrase, worker bee, landed harder than he probably realized. He leaned back, crossed his arms, already moving on to the conclusion he'd decided before the conversation even started. Let's be realistic about who you are. It became his favorite sentence. Every time I brought up independence, he repeated it. Every time I mentioned a new idea, he reframed it as impractical. Every time I showed enthusiasm, he cooled it down with logic that only ever seemed to apply to me. He said it was concern. He said he was protecting us. What he was really doing was defining my ceiling. Meanwhile, the marriage itself was quietly decaying. We stopped touching each other, not suddenly, gradually. Weeks turned into months. Eventually, more than 14 months passed without intimacy. No fight about it, no confrontation, just silence where closeness used to live. Our conversations became purely transactional. Did you pay the electric bill? Who's picking up groceries? When's the car due for servicing? We ate dinner staring at our phones, the space between us widening with every quiet meal. When I tried to talk about how distant we felt, he brushed it off. You're overthinking it. This is just what long marriages look like. Around that time, he started taking more trips. Girls' trips, he called them. Work conferences that somehow always required overnight stays. When I asked questions, the answers were vague, defensive, short. I didn't have proof of anything. No messages, no receipts. But the emotional distance had become impossible to ignore. It felt like I was living with someone who had already checked out, someone who stayed only because the arrangement still worked for him. I tried to fix it the way I knew how, by investing more, being more patient, more understanding. I told myself that 12 years meant something, that commitment mattered, that people could change if you gave them space to. That's why, after another completely silent dinner, where neither of us looked up from our screens, I suggested couples therapy. I wasn't accusing him. I wasn't threatening divorce. I genuinely wanted to try. I wanted to believe we were still salvageable. He laughed. Not awkwardly, not uncomfortably. He laughed like the idea itself was entertaining. Therapy for what, exactly? He asked. So you can complain to some stranger that I don't validate your little dreams enough? When I told him our marriage was falling apart, he didn't even hesitate. Our marriage is fine, he said. You're the one who's unhappy because you're stuck in a job you hate, and you're too scared to do anything about it. Then came the line that finally exposed everything. That's not a marriage problem, that's a you problem. In that moment, I realized something devastating. He wasn't dismissing my idea. He was dismissing me, and the seed that would end our marriage had already taken root. The marriage had been dying long before the night everything finally snapped. I just hadn't allowed myself to admit it yet. That evening started like so many others, quiet, heavy, suffocating in its normalcy. We sat at the kitchen table, plates untouched, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the space where conversation used to exist. He scrolled through his phone. I stared at the condensation sliding down my glass, watching time pass in slow motion. I told myself this is it. If I don't say something now, I never will. I think we should try couples therapy, I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. I had rehearsed the sentence a dozen times in my head, always imagining it would come out smaller, weaker. But it didn't. It landed squarely between us. He looked up, and then he laughed. Not a surprised laugh, not an uncomfortable one. A genuine, deeply amused laugh, like I'd just told a joke he hadn't been expecting but thoroughly enjoyed. Therapy? He said. For what exactly? I swallowed. For us. We barely talk anymore. We haven't been intimate in over a year. So you can complain to some stranger that I don't validate your little dreams enough? He interrupted, still smiling. Is that what this is? I felt heat rise up my neck. Our marriage is falling apart. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, completely relaxed. Our marriage is fine, he said. You're the one who's unhappy. I stared at him. Unhappy because you're stuck, he said plainly. You're stuck in a job you clearly hate and you're too scared to do anything about it. That's not a marriage problem. That's a you problem. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because of how confident he was saying them. Don't project your midlife crisis onto us, he added. Something inside me cracked. Maybe, I said slowly, I should finally do something about it. Actually start the consulting business I've been talking about. That was when he laughed again. Louder this time. With what money? He asked. What clients? He shook his head like the conclusion was obvious. You'd crash and burn in 6 months, he said. And then where would we be? I'd be supporting both of us entirely while you found yourself. No, thank you. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. A steady, grounding thud. You really think I'd be nothing without you? I asked. He didn't hesitate. I think you'd struggle significantly, he said. Someone in this relationship has to be realistic. That was it. There was no yelling, no slammed doors, no dramatic exit. Just clarity. Let's test that theory, I said. He rolled his eyes. Here we go again. Another dramatic declaration that leads absolutely nowhere. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I nodded slowly, pushed my chair in, and went to bed. He thought it was over. I knew it had just begun. The next morning, before work, I contacted a divorce attorney. Not to file. Not yet. I needed information. I needed protection. I needed to understand what leaving would cost me. My state followed equitable distribution. Not 50-50, but fair. Given that he had contributed more financially, and the house down payment had come entirely from his parents, the attorney was blunt. Best case scenario, she said, you're looking at 35 to 40% of shared assets. The house would likely need to be sold. My retirement accounts would be partially split. I would take a hit. I told her I understood. Freedom from constant belittlement has a price, and I was ready to pay it. Over the next 2 months, I worked quietly, methodically. I reached out to former colleagues, past clients, people who had trusted my work. I built a real business plan, conservative projections, realistic timelines. I set up an LLC with proper legal structure. I opened a separate business account, funded only with savings that were legally mine from before the marriage, never commingled. He didn't notice. He was too busy with his book club that conveniently met every Thursday night, too distracted by work conferences that suddenly required frequent overnight stays. When I finally served him with divorce papers on a Tuesday evening, he stared at them like they were written in a foreign language. You're serious? He asked. You're actually doing this to us? Yes, I said calmly, I am. And for the first time in 12 years, he had no idea how to respond. The shock didn't hit him all at once. At first, he laughed again, short, disbelieving, like this was just another one of my moments that would pass if he ignored it long enough. You're overreacting, he said, flipping through the divorce paper as if they might change if he skimmed them faster. You don't actually want this. I didn't argue. That unsettled him more than any raised voice ever could. When he realized I wasn't taking them back, that I wasn't crying or apologizing or asking him to reconsider, his expression shifted. The confidence drained out of his posture in slow stages, replaced by something sharper. Anger. You're really throwing away 12 years over one stupid comment? He snapped. Over a laugh? It wasn't one comment, I said. My voice stayed even, steady in a way I barely recognized. It was 12 years of being told I wasn't enough. He scoffed. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. That's when the tactics started changing. One day he was furious, accusing me of betrayal, of being ungrateful, of humiliating him by involving lawyers. The next, he was strangely calm, almost gentle, asking if we could just talk without attorneys involved. Then came the threats. "I'll destroy you in court," he said one night, pacing the living room. "I'll tell everyone you're having some kind of breakdown. People will believe me." I looked at him and realized something terrifyingly simple. He meant it. When that didn't work, he tried guilt. "You know how much my parents did for us," he said. "The house, the support. You're really going to walk away from all that?" "Yes," I said. He didn't recognize the woman answering him anymore. Then came the tears. Loud, dramatic, uncontrollable. He collapsed onto the couch one evening, face in his hands, sobbing about how he'd failed me, how he'd taken me for granted, how he just needed more time. I felt nothing. Not cruelty, not satisfaction. Just distance. When that failed too, he tried seduction. One night, after more than 14 months of nothing between us, he appeared in the doorway wearing lingerie I hadn't seen in years, like the last year and a half hadn't existed, like desire could erase history. I turned away and slept on the couch. For 3 months, while the divorce dragged on, I lived in that narrow space, half the apartment, half the life. He contested everything, every item, every valuation. He demanded appraisals for things that were clearly worthless, just to slow the process down. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. By the time it was over, I walked away with 38% of our shared assets, around $89,000. After the house was sold and everything split, he acted like he'd won because he kept the larger share. I let him believe that. I took my money, rented a small one-bedroom apartment, and officially launched my consulting business 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I slept on a mattress on the floor that first night. No headboard, no shared furniture, just silence. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like relief. I didn't celebrate the divorce. There was no dramatic sense of victory, no moment where I stood in my empty apartment and felt triumphant. What I felt instead was focus, sharp, consuming, almost clinical. I had traded comfort for freedom, and now I needed to make that choice count. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I officially launched my consulting business. No grand opening, no announcement party, just a quiet LLC registration, a bare-bones website, and a calendar that suddenly felt terrifyingly empty. The first few weeks were brutal in their own way. Not because I doubted my ability, but because I was finally alone with it. No one mocking me, no one dismissing my ideas, no one reminding me to be realistic. Just me, my experience, and the work. I reached out to former colleagues first. People I'd worked with years ago who had trusted my judgment on complex systems integrations. I didn't pitch dreams, I pitched solutions. Specific problems I knew how to solve. Clear value, clear timelines. Slowly, the responses came in. A short contract here, a referral there, a client who paid on time and asked for more. 8 months in, I sat at my small kitchen table, this time in my apartment, staring at my revenue numbers in disbelief. $180,000 in revenue. After expenses, software subscriptions, insurance, accounting, contractor payments, I had netted around $95,000. More than I'd ever made working for him. More than I'd made at my corporate job. I didn't tell anyone right away, not out of secrecy, out of instinct. I wanted the success to feel real before I shared it. Then people started noticing on their own. LinkedIn connections exploded. Old coworkers congratulated me. Clients recommended me publicly. The business wasn't flashy, but it was solid, sustainable, built on actual expertise, not ego. That's when he reappeared. At first, indirectly. Mutual friends started asking how I was doing. Casual questions, innocent tones. Then came the comments. "He mentioned you the other day. He seems worried about you. He said he's proud of what you're building." Proud. The word sat wrong in my chest. A few weeks later, the first text arrived. "Hey, I saw your business announcement on LinkedIn. Congrats on taking the leap. We should grab coffee sometime and catch up." I didn't reply. A month passed. Another text. "I've had a lot of time to reflect. I wasn't supportive enough of your dreams. I'm genuinely sorry." Still nothing from me. Then the narrative started shifting. Friends told me he'd been saying he always believed in me, that he knew I'd succeed eventually, that he was proud to have been part of my journey. Revisionist history, rewritten in real time. His sister, who I'd always gotten along with reasonably well, reached out next. I'm not supposed to tell you this, she said, but he's been struggling since you left. His company did layoffs in March. He had to take a significant pay cut just to keep his position. I listened. I thanked her for telling me. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no secret pleasure. Just emptiness where anger used to be. Then came what I would later think of as the entitlement phase. His mother called one Saturday morning, voice already tight with judgment. I think you and my son really need to talk, she said. This whole divorce was a terrible mistake. With respect, I replied, your son told me I'd be nothing without him. Those were his exact words. He was frustrated, she said quickly. All marriages have rough patches. You don't just give up on 12 years. I didn't, I said. I tried couples therapy. He laughed at me. Well, he's willing to try now, she pressed. Isn't that what should matter going forward? No, I said quietly. What matters is that he only wants to try now that I'm successful, and he's struggling. She hung up on me without another word. The following week, he texted again. We need to talk about some financial stuff left over from the divorce. Can you call me? Against my better judgment, I did. There was no financial issue. I've been thinking about us constantly, he said, about what went wrong. I've grown so much since we split. Is there actual business to discuss? I asked. Business? He snapped. Is that seriously all you care about now? You've changed so much. Yes, I said, I have. I miss you, he said softly. I miss the way things used to be. Things used to be you telling me I was a worker bee with unrealistic dreams, I replied. I don't miss that. I was wrong, he said. I'm admitting it. Isn't that enough? It's enough for you, I said, not for me. He cried, accused me of being cold, said the woman he married would have been more forgiving. The woman you married, I said, spent 12 years believing she wasn't good enough because you told her so. That woman doesn't exist anymore. I hung up. That night, I blocked his number. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt something unmistakable. Peace. Blocking his number didn't end it. It just changed the route. After that call, after I made it clear, finally, unmistakably, that there was no version of me going back, the messages stopped coming directly from him. For a while, there was silence, real silence, and I thought maybe that was it. Maybe this was the part where everything slowly faded into the past. I was wrong. The first message came from one of his friends, someone who had been firmly on his side during the divorce, someone who had watched me pack my things without saying a word. He's really struggling, the message read. You don't have to get back together, but maybe you could at least talk to him. Closure would help. I didn't respond. Then another friend reached out. Then another. Different tones. Same message. Mediation. Healing. Being the bigger person. I started to feel it then. Not guilt exactly, but pressure. The subtle suggestion that my refusal to engage was cruelty. That walking away quietly somehow made me responsible for how badly he was handling the consequences of his own behavior. At the same time, his story was evolving. Mutual acquaintances mentioned, carefully, that he'd been telling people I had changed. That success had made me cold. That I was obsessed with money now. That I'd lost my values. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt. Because there were nights, quiet ones, alone in my apartment, where doubt crept in. Where exhaustion set in. Where I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I really had become harder than I meant to. Not because I missed him, but because 12 years of being told who you are doesn't disappear overnight. There were moments when I questioned myself, when I replayed old conversations, searching for some version of events where I had misunderstood him, where I'd been too sensitive, where leaving had been an overreaction. Those were the darkest moments, not loneliness, but confusion. Around that time, his sister reached out again. She's not handling this well, she said. He's not handling this well. He keeps saying he lost everything. I almost laughed. He hadn't lost everything. He had lost me. There's a difference. But that night, after the call, the weight of it all settled on my chest. The marriage, the divorce, the years of erosion, the rebuilding, the constant noise from people who wanted resolution on their terms. I sat on the edge of my bed and let myself feel it fully for the first time. Not anger, not grief. Exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying someone else's expectations for too long. For a brief moment, just a moment, I wondered what would happen if I gave in. If I met him for coffee. If I let him apologize one more time. If I allowed him to believe he was still part of my story. And that's when it hit me. That urge wasn't about forgiveness. It was about habit, about the old version of me that had been trained to smooth things over, to absorb discomfort, to make things easier for everyone else, even at my own expense. That realization hurt more than anything he'd ever said, because it meant the final battle wasn't with him. It was with the part of me that had survived by shrinking. And I knew, standing there in the quiet, that if I went back now, even for one conversation, I would be undoing everything I had fought to become. So I didn't respond. To him, to his friends, to his family. I chose the silence. And for the first time, it wasn't empty. It was protective. The call came out of nowhere. I was in the middle of a regular afternoon. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy. Just me, my laptop, a half-finished cup of coffee, and a calendar filled with client calls. My life had settled into something steady, predictable in the best way. That's when a journalist from Forbes emailed me. At first, I thought it was spam. I read it twice before it registered. Not the print magazine, not a cover story, an online feature in their small business and entrepreneurship section. They were working on a piece about tech consultants who had successfully transitioned from corporate careers to independent businesses in the post-pandemic economy. One of my clients had mentioned my work to someone who knew someone at Forbes. That was it. No grand narrative, no revenge arc, just professional credibility moving through the quiet channels it always does. The interview was scheduled as a video call. It lasted about an hour. They asked about my background, about leaving corporate work at 38, about building a company from scratch, about what finally pushed me to take the leap after years of staying put. I gave the sanitized version. I realized I wasn't living up to my potential in my previous situation, I said, and I needed to make a fundamental change. I didn't mention the laughter. I didn't mention the word nothing. I didn't mention him at all. The article went live 2 weeks later. From corporate burnout to consulting success. How one IT professional built a thriving business from the ground up. Seeing my name, my company, professional photos, all of it framed in that unmistakable Forbes layout. It felt surreal. Not because I needed validation, but because for years I had been told, explicitly and implicitly, that this version of my life was impossible. Within 48 hours, the ripple effects started. 3 new client inquiries referencing the article, a flood of LinkedIn connection requests, messages from old colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. Then, the moment that finally severed the last emotional thread. I was clearing out my business inbox when I noticed something flagged in my spam folder. An email from my ex-husband, sent to my business address, the one publicly listed on my website. Subject line, interview request, journalist inquiry. He claimed he was writing a piece about relationship dynamics and career success for a publication he conveniently didn't name. He wanted to interview me about how my personal journey had influenced my professional growth. He was pretending to be a journalist to get me to respond. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I screenshot the email and forwarded it to my attorney. Not because I planned to act, but because documentation matters when someone starts crossing boundaries. After that, I did nothing. I left it in spam, exactly where it belonged. Later that day, his sister texted me. She saw the Forbes article, she said. She's not handling it well. I'm genuinely worried about her mental state. I didn't reply. That evening, his mother called. Blocked number, so it went through. You need to talk to him, she said immediately. He's been crying for days since that article came out. You're being deliberately cruel. I'm not being anything, I replied calmly. I'm living my life. You're really going to punish him forever over one comment? It wasn't one comment, I said. It was 12 years. She called me heartless, said success had gone to my head, said I'd become arrogant, unrecognizable. Here's the truth. My success didn't change me. It clarified everything I had been told to doubt. For 12 years, I believed I was the weak link in my marriage, that I was lucky to be tolerated, that my ambitions were indulgent fantasies. Now I knew that wasn't true. Not because Forbes said so, but because I proved it to myself. And that was the moment. Quiet, decisive, irreversible, when I finally stopped carrying his version of me. I thought that would be the end of it. The article had done its work. The boundary had been crossed, exposed, and quietly shut down. I had documentation. I had distance. I had a life that no longer revolved around reacting to him. But closure, I learned, isn't something everyone accepts. A few days after the Forbes article went live, a mutual friend reached out, one of the few who had stayed genuinely neutral throughout the divorce. I have to tell you something, she said, because it's starting to get weird. She hesitated, like she was choosing her words carefully. He's been telling people you two are working things out, that the Forbes article was actually your way of proving yourself to him, that you're planning to reconcile soon. I felt my stomach drop. not in fear, but in disbelief. He had constructed an entire fictional narrative where he was still central to my story, where my success somehow belonged to us, where I was still orbiting him, even after everything. That was the moment I understood something clearly. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about regret. It was about ownership. That evening, I opened LinkedIn and drafted a short post. Nothing aggressive, nothing explicit. Just gratitude for the recent Forbes feature, appreciation for the new opportunities it had brought, and one final sentence that felt like it had been sitting in my chest for years. Building this company has been a journey of self-discovery, independence, and learning to trust my own vision, especially when others doubted it loudly. Here's to everyone who's ever been told they're not entrepreneur material. Prove them wrong. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. Everyone who knew our history understood exactly what I was saying. The response was immediate. Supportive comments, messages from people sharing similar stories, quiet acknowledgments from those who had seen what my marriage really was. The next morning, his mother emailed me. Not called, emailed. To my business address. That LinkedIn post was petty and completely unnecessary, she wrote. You're publicly humiliating my son. I didn't respond. Some people don't deserve responses. 2 days later, another email appeared in my spam folder. Different email address, same writing style. My ex again. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, the message read. I know I was wrong about you, but can we please talk once? I need you to understand that I'm proud of you, that I always saw your potential, even if I expressed it badly. I stared at the words for a long time. Always saw my potential. This was the same man who had called me a worker bee, who said I'd crash and burn in 6 months, who laughed in my face when I asked for therapy to save our marriage. The rewriting of history was impressive in its audacity. I wasn't angry anymore. That part had burned itself out months ago, during the endless paperwork and contested valuations and sleepless nights on a couch that wasn't mine. What I felt now was something else entirely. Finality? I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I didn't block the new address. I just let it sit where it landed. In spam. And for the first time, I understood that consequences don't always look like punishment. Sometimes, they look like being excluded from a story you no longer get to tell. The last message I ever received about him didn't come from him. It came from his sister. She texted late one evening, apologetic before she even explained why she was reaching out. I just thought you should know, she wrote. He's in therapy now, working through a lot of things. He had to take another pay cut at work last quarter. He moved into a smaller apartment after the house sold. He's ordinary now. I think that's been the hardest part for him. I stared at the word ordinary longer than I expected. He wasn't ruined. He wasn't destitute. He wasn't suffering some dramatic downfall. He was just living a life that, once upon a time, he would have considered beneath him. And I realized then that this wasn't revenge. It was alignment. My business had grown beyond what I initially projected. Not explosively, not overnight, but steadily, sustainably. I hired 2 part-time contractors to handle overflow work. Clients came back. Contracts renewed. The work spoke for itself. I was dating casually, nothing serious, just conversations with people who met me where I was, who didn't flinch at my ambition or treat my ideas like indulgences. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. The Forbes article sits framed in my home office now, not because I need external proof that I matter, but because it reminds me of something quieter, more important. For 12 years, I believed I was lucky to be chosen, lucky to be tolerated, lucky to be supported. I was wrong. The only thing that changed wasn't my ability, it was my belief in it. My ex-fake interview request is still sitting in my spam folder. I never deleted it. Not out of bitterness, but because it perfectly captures the difference between who we became. He needed a platform to feel powerful again. I didn't need to respond at all. Some emails don't deserve answers. Some chapters don't need closure conversations. They just need to end. And when they do, what's left isn't anger. It's space. Space to build, space to breathe, space to finally trust yourself, especially after years of being told you shouldn't. Thanks for following this journey. Time to write the next chapter. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, for sitting with the uncomfortable parts, and for staying through the quiet moments where growth doesn't look dramatic, just necessary. Stories like this aren't really about success or divorce or even revenge. They're about what happens when someone spends years believing a version of themselves that was handed to them by the wrong person, and what it takes to finally let that version go. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of something you've lived through yourself, you're not alone. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes telling your story is the first step toward reclaiming it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want more stories like this. Slow burn, emotionally grounded, and honest about what it really takes to walk away and rebuild. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.